It is 11:03 a.m. Central, and I call this meeting of the State Board of Education Strategic Planning Committee to order. Ms. Reed, please call the roll to determine a quorum.
Mr. Jensen.
Here.
Ms. McInturf.
Here.
Chairman Holt.
Here.
Mr. Holt, you have all three committee members present.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. We have a quorum as this committee is meeting virtually. We have prepared a statement of necessity to be read into the record. Mr. Shanahan, please read the statement.
Thank you and good morning, Mr. Chair. Ryan Shanahan, Associate General Counsel, State Board. The Tennessee State Board of Education Strategic Planning Committee called an electronic meeting at 11 a.m. Central Time today, Monday, September 29, 2025. This meeting is called to review feedback received in response to the recent stakeholder survey and discuss potential updates to the State Board's master plan. Due to the time-sensitive nature of the items on the committee's agenda, and due to the fact that the committee members reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for purposes of this meeting, and as such, this meeting should be conducted electronically. Notice of the meeting was posted on the State Board's website, along with the agenda and instructions for accessing the meeting.
And our board meetings policy, as well as TCA 8-44-108, require all votes during electronic meetings of the board be taken by call of the roll. As this is a virtual meeting that's being recorded, I move that the recording serve as the minutes for this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
In favor? Ms. Reed, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Jensen.
Yes.
Ms. McInturf.
Yes.
Chairman Holt.
This is the second meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee, and the purpose of today's meeting is to review feedback received from our master plan stakeholder survey, in which we approved last meeting, and to begin discussing potential updates to the State Board's master plan. Are there any questions about the agenda? I ask that members and staff identify themselves before addressing the group. For the benefit of all those listening, please avoid the overuse of jargon and acronyms when possible. I'll turn it over to Ms. Brianna Summers to get us started. Ms. Summers.
Thank you, Chairman Holt. Brianna Summers, Director of Policy and Academics here at the Tennessee State Board of Education. Excited to be with you this morning. Our goal for the next 30 minutes during my section of the presentation is to review the stakeholder survey feedback that we received from across Tennessee, and also put that in conversation with the feedback that you all submitted via your survey, as well as staff members during our meeting in January. After, Ms. Allie Reed will lead us through a group discussion on sort of the so what in terms of decisions and next steps that we want to take as a result of the responses that I'll share with you today. So go ahead and get those wheels turning with thoughts for Ms. Reed, and I'm happy to do Q&A throughout. You just come off mute, jump in. We'd love to hear from y'all. Okay, so as you might remember from our last meeting, you approved some questions that we'll look at in just a moment, but we conducted a stakeholder survey across the state of Tennessee that was open for 1 month. And then we also extended it for an additional week to encourage those last minute responses. We conducted mostly email outreach and follow-up to make sure that we heard from as wide of a range of Tennesseans as possible. 17 out of 39 folks responded. That's about 44%. However, I will say that they were really high quality and also from executive leadership from across Tennessee. That includes chairs of committees at the Tennessee General Assembly, as well as, some of our usual suspects like the Tennessee Education Research Alliance. But we also tried to push ourselves to outside of the box in terms of the Tennessee Roundtable and folks in the workforce space who will, eventually inherit and hopefully employ our Tennessee graduates. In terms of who's missing, we're so excited that Britton Sapp joined us last week for onboarding on Thursday. And we'll look forward to her feedback that we'll gather this week to make sure that student voice is represented. Okay, so as promised, here are the questions that you approved at your last board meeting based on member feedback. And just to jog your memory and sort of give you 4 broad categories. First, we asked, who they are and what they care about. Then we wanted to better understand how they see our work, our role in the education policy landscape. 3 issues that they wanted to elevate, particularly, thinking about the next couple of years, legislative session. Some folks who responded are going through their own strategic planning like THEC. And then finally, feedback on our current plan. So, what's working, what can we improve, and why? We're excited that most respondents highlighted a lot of alignment. And when there was misalignment, which, is natural to happen, they framed it as an opportunity for dialogue and we're open to being constructive and collaborative. So we're really grateful for our partners. Stakeholders broadly see the State Board of Education as an important ally in advancing high standards, teacher quality, and college readiness, which is great. Where there was misalignment, it was normally around specific policy proposals that they wanted to engage on, which is great. Sometimes around licensure, academic standards. However, it wasn't always with a full understanding of the state board's role as the rule and policymaking body. So we are always excited for the opportunity to highlight that process so that stakeholders can engage and really link arms with us and do this work. And we can definitely see that fitting on the engagement and accountability section, which will be in some future slides from Ms. Reed and myself. In terms of top issues, it was really great to see, we didn't plan it this way, we swear, but really strong member alignment and stakeholder alignment, which is always great. There was high agreement on teacher workforce, specifically retention, which is powerful, and literacy as the 2 most urgent levers for improving student outcomes. Stakeholders also, I think many members on this call will be excited to hear they wanted to talk about career readiness and life skills and innovative learning models, which is always fun to make education more relevant as our world changes and grows. And I definitely heard that in our last meeting's conversation. We heard loud and clear from multiple stakeholders that they not only want to focus on all student groups, as well as, students with disabilities, English learners, economically disadvantaged students, and to keep that dual focused. We also heard some practical barriers like student absenteeism and class size. However, those were sort of more rare and sprinkled throughout the surveys. Okay, so in terms of recommendations, that next section, they really want us to modernize student learning while maintaining high expectations for students and schools. There's also this interesting piece on sort of the process. They are interested in us playing a proactive and collaborative role to connect K-12, higher ed, workforce, and real world outcomes, which, it's incredible that we're trusted to do that work. Members, any questions so far about the survey? Okay, I'll keep tracking, but please jump in. Okay, this section, I'll now for the next 4 slides get into our current strategic focus areas and sort of highlight what's going on in each of them in terms of what they'd like to keep and what maybe folks would like us to change or consider. The options on the survey included sort of a keep section. There was also sort of like remove, revise, edit, that kind of stuff. And I'll give you those high data points on sort of how the group landed across stakeholders, but just know that of that sort of change section, it was mostly line item edits versus, completely scrapping something. So take that into consideration when I share that data. And in the keep section was sort of a high bar in the sense that it was, no notes, no edits. For literacy, as you might remember, our first goal is around 3rd grade ELA TCAP scores and proficiency. 11 folks asked us to keep it as written, and 5 folks had various edit and revision responses. For goal 2, it's very similar, but just moves us up to 8th grade ELA TCAP proficiency. We had 8 folks mark keep as written and 8 folks in the sort of remove, revise, replace space. Some of the things that folks mentioned in terms of revisions were adding growth measures, expanding to other subject areas. I know we had a really robust conversation around numeracy. There seemed to be some continued interest there. And also adjusting benchmarks, whether that's doing it by grade band or, as I mentioned, we've currently done 8th grade, is there a value to switching to 7th grade or 6th grade, for example, and sort of why did we pick that grade and what's the intentionality and the why there. Interesting thing is some stakeholders also encouraged us to consider our role in state government if we don't meet our goals, right? We know that we're only one stakeholder in a very complicated and rich landscape, but sort of where is our locus of control in the event that some of these goals are not met. So Ms. Reed and the committee and other folks have been thinking about how that might impact strategic focus area 4, which is around engagement and accountability. Okay, post-secondary and career, lots of interest here, both in the open-ended comments as well as their priorities from partners. Just for some context, goal 3 is around increasing post-secondary and career readiness. We had a great conversation there, and just to refresh your memory, it is based on multiple pathways currently, and in some of the proposals that we'll get into in just a moment, whether that's getting an industry credential, dual enrollment, AP classes, not just for your institution. Similarly, our goal 4 in post-secondary and careers all around post-secondary enrollment. And that post-secondary word is pretty broad. And I know it's a little confusing because everybody uses the word differently, but as it's defined here by THEC, it's 4-year college, 2-year college, etc. And so the questions are, are folks meeting those benchmark readiness? Are they a ready graduate? And then also, are they enrolling in some sort of post-secondary opportunity that summer or that fall after they graduate from a Tennessee high school? Some of the feedback we got from stakeholders included, would we want to do multiple measures beyond the existing pathways? And would we want to think about things beyond enrollment? Not only did you get to college, but did you get through college or TCAP or whatever that person is interested in? There was also an interest on broadening our metrics. So employment outcomes, are you getting hired from that degree? Thinking, a couple of steps down beyond the K-12 experience, military, stuff like that. Our next goal is around teachers and leaders. Goal 5 is, which, garnered a lot of rich discussion last time, which was exciting. What does it take to move a teacher who's in a permit, sort of a temporary ability to be a teacher, to a license, which is a more permanent thing, just like your driver's permit, your driver's license. It's not forever, but it's certainly more permanent within 3 years. So we found somebody who's interested. Maybe they don't check all of the boxes quite yet, but they're, maybe doing great in that classroom, really effective. How can we get them to stay and be licensed within 3 years? 11 folks asked us to keep as written, and 5 folks had revision, removal, etc. feedback. I will note in this area, we've had a lot of activity over the last year or 2 years. The state board, particularly the licensure review committee led by Mr. Michael Derline on the call, have made great strides to address licensure requirements and making sure that we don't have unnecessary or prohibitive barriers, which is sometimes what we've heard from folks in the past. And what was really exciting, similar to members, stakeholders were most interested in talking about teacher retention. So it's always nice when that works out. And they had some really great ideas in this area. Some of their suggestions were extending that timeline from permit to license. What would it look to think beyond 3 years? They also talked about support structures and not just licensure, but effectiveness, right? Being in a classroom is not enough. Are you actually positively impacting student learning? Thinking back to member surveys and staff feedback, we also know that we could add leaders more thoroughly and thoughtfully into this plan. So we're really excited to add that into the action steps and goals potentially if the committee is still interested in doing that. Last but not least, engagement and accountability. Goal 6 is all around our rules and policies, and Chairman Holt made some really thoughtful suggestions at our last meeting. 15 folks did say keep as written. One person did have some feedback on sort of revisions in this area, and I think similar to Chairman Holt, one member remarked on how it could be more specific and measurable, which is always hard when you don't have a crystal ball, but it's certainly something we want to strive for. And this definitely aligns with the staff feedback that we heard earlier this year. They're interested in measuring staff engagement, board member engagement, and potentially some of our educator licensure discipline work, which is so important and the board has been really engaged on. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that members have.
Rena, this is Bob. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do, Chairman Eby.
Back on your third goal, talking about teachers and leaders, I heard a lot about teachers, which I think is critically important. But what about leader development? What kind of feedback did we get on that, or anything? Or
That's a great question. I'd love to look at the survey in more detail to make sure I pull out all of the nuggets about leadership. I do think at least one person remarked, let's make sure we include leaders. I also really appreciated Ms. McIntosh's comments on sort of collaborative environments and how, leaders can really be that make or break point. I know when I was in the classroom, a good principal can keep you there forever, and a tough principal may, push you earlier out of the classroom or certainly to a different school or district can really make all the difference. So I'm also thinking about our partners at the Tennessee Education Research Alliance. Dr. Jason Grissom is a nationwide renowned expert at any conference that he attends on teacher leaders. I'd be curious about his thoughts. And I do believe Tennessee Education Research Alliance, they have a specific leader track on their survey. So I would wonder what sort of support systems they're looking for. State board staff, what did I miss? Please jump in.
I think that's exactly right. Really just the fact that in our current master plan, there's a little bit of an absence of any specific goal or actions related to leader recruitment, effective leadership, or retention. And so we will talk about that in the next part of this conversation of what we want to consider for including here.
I think those are all excellent points. And I think we have a unique situation with Chrissy now being in the leadership position she's in, but I think it is critical that we have good, strong leaders and do what we can to encourage that to help throughout the entire education process. So, yeah, thank you.
Ms. Larry Jensen, may surprise you that I want to ask some questions about post-secondary.
I thought of you the whole time. I drafted my notes on the slide.
I guess, I mean, these goals are, they're what you heard is great. I'm just, will be behind this? In other words, what we put these out there and what's behind it that defines what those look like?
That's a great question. And I know Ms. Reed and I have talked about sort of how we can really signpost those definitions so that we're all on the same page of, what we're measuring and what we're not measuring. So, I defer to Ms. Reed as our fearless leader, but I could very much see some like definitions clear up at the top of like, this is what's important.
Right.
The other interesting consideration in terms of definitions is, we have state accountability and we have federal accountability, and the landscape is, potentially it could shift down the road, but there isn't, I think Ms. Reed wants to get into a substantive conversation about, whichever measure we pick is important because this is the plan for the entire state of Tennessee. And I would love board members' thoughts on, which one resonates and why.
Just anecdotally, in some measure, as I said, earlier, I went to Humboldt, which is the Northwest superintendent meeting, and it was really interesting. And I didn't bring this up; they did, but there was a sort of a real big rise among those superintendents about post-secondary pathways that were both career readiness, which they then talked about agriculture. That was their big, I was really kind of surprised by it, frankly. But it was very much at the top of their list on things that we needed to be doing or they felt they needed for career and career readiness. The other thing that I found most interesting, this was several months ago, the superintendent of I think it was Germantown, which is, that's as affluent community as there is in the state, told me, he said, we are having parents call us, asking us, what are y'all doing about career and technical education? And I just want to make sure we're measuring or sensing, or I don't know what the right word is, what the depth of that needs to be in order to meet what the people and the parents and the kids need. And I don't know how to come to that conclusion. I'm not suggesting it. I was really surprised at Humboldt when they just and it went around the room unsolicited among the superintendents. So what I'm asking is, how do we kind of get a pulse on that? What do we need to do? And I'm not asking for an answer right now. It's more rhetorical at the moment.
Okay.
What do we need to do in order to think deeply about that, or bigger, or whatever? I don't have an answer. I'm just asking a question. Thank you.
I love the question, Mr. Jensen, and you're not alone in this. A couple of thoughts I have off the bat. So in terms of TISA funding, I know one of the things that they look at for some of the funding streams are what are the regional needs, right? Because we know, I don't have to tell this group that the economic needs in Memphis can be different than, my mom's hometown in Elizabethton up in East Tennessee. And so they sort of track different programs based on regional needs. They also look at, and there's lots of conversation from folks like SCORE on credentials of value, will there be jobs and will they pay well, a life-sustaining and career-sustaining wage. So that's certainly something we can think about. The second piece I'll mention from the survey, lots of folks asked something to the effect of whether it would make sense to do like career ready standards, or, I think other states and organizations have called them durable skills, those soft skills that I'm sure Mr. Jensen, you hire for, and Chairman Eby hires for, and Ms. McInturf looks for, and her teachers of, can you collaborate with others? Can you see other people's perspectives? Do you show up to work on time? That kind of stuff. So we got multiple pieces of feedback around that. And, with your role on the State Board of Education approving academic standards, that's something we could definitely sink our teeth into. Did that answer your question, Mr. Jensen, at least starting?
Well, I would just, there's a subset to my question, and that is that we've got, XAI came in here, and nobody had any idea, except we're now beginning to see it. And then Google, I don't know if y'all know this, that they've announced they are going immediately across the Mississippi River in West Memphis and doing $1 billion facility. So there is a great need right now in this part of the world to figure out what we need to be doing in order to provide that workforce. Have we been to visit with the XAI? I'm asking these, not asking for an answer. The XAI people, or even the Google people across the river, because those kids are going to come out of Memphis in all likelihood. So I'm just putting that out there for us to, as a board, to be challenged by it. You know, what is it that we need to do, not a year from now or not 5 years from now, but what do we need to do today, frankly? Because the opportunity is big. Just one more comment that, I mean, XAI is paying at Silicon Valley salaries today.
Wow.
So I just put that out in front of us, and it seems our responsibility to think about that. So, and it's got to be in this somewhere. And again, I don't need an answer today. I'm putting that out there more as a challenge to us.
I love that. Mr. Chairman, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm not sure where to raise my hand to speak on this thing, but I think what Larry is saying is really critical. If you look at what the governor is trying, first you look at our mission. Our mission is prepare students for post-secondary success. And then you look at what the governor and the Tennessee Economic Development Organization is doing across the state, not just in West Tennessee.
Right.
Larry talks about the things that are going on in West Tennessee. In my own hometown in Oak Ridge, 3 companies just announced each one of them over $1 billion investment
Right.
within the last couple of months. The governor wants to make Tennessee the nuclear state of the nation. And you know, how are we going to meet these needs? I think workforce development, and this goes back to what I really would like to see is good alignment. I was glad to see THEC has responded here. Good alignment between higher education, between the Department of Education, between the State Board of Education, and how we can work together to get to meet the workforce needs across the state. So I think this issue right here, this goal is very critical for the state, and we need a lot of good alignment and agreement with what we put down here, and a lot of thought in that. So good point, Larry.
Thank you.
Absolutely. On AI, 2 things I'll point out, members, and Ms. Reed could speak to this in more detail. Your member retreat will have an opportunity to talk about AI, which is exciting. And also one thing that you may have seen when you were passing the CTE standards is for each CTE course, they have AI standards for each and every one of them embedded into the context. So if it is agribusiness, you know, how could you use AI to model crop yields? I'm really speaking out of my expertise area here, but you get the gist. They'll sort of apply them directly to the career expertise area. And then finally, your English Language Arts Standards Recommendation Committee is currently meeting, and they specifically pointed out AI right at the get-go, and they've been considering where and how it would make sense in the ELA standards to really be thoughtful there for our next generation.
This is Michael Drellin. I don't know if I can chime in. That's all right.
Go ahead, Michael.
One thought I had on this, you know, I think the department has done a great job of bringing modernized new CTE courses in these spaces. So just in August, you all voted to approve a precision agriculture course, which I think fits very neatly within what you're discussing. I think where that line sort of ends and a different one begins is around whether districts are actually offering those courses. And so I think that the questions that you can ask of your stakeholders in your region are, you know, after you're approving these courses that seem highly relevant to the businesses coming into your area, are they being offered by districts? And if not, what are those barriers to offering them? So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Great point.
Everyone is trying to steal my thunder here. I was going to talk about exactly that, Michael, next. So I do want to, we're already having great discussion and great points that stem from some of the feedback we heard. So we're going to get into that next. But just before I take over, I do want to just pause for one moment. Was there any other highlights from the survey responses? Members, you got a chance to review those that we didn't discuss here that was coming back to mind you wanted to point out?
I'll just say that I'm impressed by the organizations that took the time to respond, and I thought every one of their comments were really, really good, and appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, the moment we've been waiting for. Thank you, Brianna. We're going to move into a discussion on what do we do with all this feedback? What are we considering? So first, I want to bring us back to the key questions that we discussed starting in May when we had our kickoff conversation at the May workshop. We brought these questions forward. Good to keep in mind as we're making tweaks, revisions to the master plan. First being, where should we focus our collective efforts? What will afford us, secondly, the highest leverage for our energy and time? And then thirdly, in what ways are we promoting coherence and continuous improvement at both the state and local levels? So just wanted to bring these key questions back to the forefront of the conversation as we start to dig in. Our next set of slides will include 2 slides per master plan focus area. So starting with literacy. And the first slide within literacy section will be proposed revisions, which are based on survey feedback, kind of quick hits, things that we are all on the same page, staff members, survey respondents, seems like the right direction to head in. And we'll then have a second slide that has some discussion questions for the committee today. As Brianna reminded us earlier, our survey asked respondents to consider each of the annual goals that exist within the 4 focus areas and to suggest whether to keep, adjust, or remove. And so the slides that you'll see next for this portion of our meeting really directly reflects those recommendations, and more specifically for those respondents that suggested revisions or removal of a goal, you'll see some of that feedback reflected in those discussion questions that we'll talk about collectively. There are also other pieces of feedback that we heard in which we have some limitations to. We can't exactly respond or implement precisely what was being suggested. And so we'll be sure to point that, or I'll point that out along the way as well. But if a question related to that comes to mind, certainly let me know. So starting with literacy, here's some highlights of what we heard. There was that strong agreement that accelerated gains for underserved students must remain central to the goal. And I think that idea, if we are incorporating it here, we want to ensure we're reflecting that in the additional focus areas as well. So calling out specific underserved populations of students. And then also this idea, as Brianna referenced earlier, is this cautious optimism about the structure of the goal, but then more of a concern about the realism or measurements of the goal. So we'll talk about that next. A few quotes that I wanted to highlight here, one being from survey respondents. This person said, I suggest creating one overarching goal for literacy with benchmarks along the way for different grade levels and a separate parallel benchmark related to math achievement. That is one consideration that we have, and we'll discuss next what we think that should look like. But we really did hear over and over the need to add numeracy into this. So we do believe that that is first and foremost the proposed revision is that adding numeracy into this focus area and then the accompanying actions and goals to expand this to literacy and numeracy. Another person commented saying to keep it as written, the goals that we had here, but noting that it's very aggressive and wanted to know if there was proof that we can move this percentage realistically. You may remember that the way we calculated this gave us annual percentage increases that we were looking at and reflecting on within our annual master plan report. So some of the feedback that we heard from stakeholders was just to reconsider if that was the right goals to set for our annual increments. Also, in conversation with the Department of Education, there was a seconded desire for the addition to add math to this focus area, as well as prioritizing the preservation of accountability and assessment and a continuation of high quality academic standards, which Brianna also was just referencing. So our proposed edits or revisions to literacy, you can see here on the slide. We talked about the addition of numeracy, also maintaining the goal for 3rd grade literacy and then adding a goal for 7th grade math. This was a recommendation specifically from a few of our stakeholders, noting that 7th grade is most likely the last point in which you have students all taking the same level or same coursework before it starts to split or diverge depending on a student's path. So when you get to 8th grade, you could have some students on taking an Algebra 1 course in 8th grade or the 8th grade math. And so that's where you start to see different pathways. So actually focusing on 7th grade was the proposal here, if we are going to choose a single grade to highlight. And then additional action steps related to the continued approval of high quality ELA and math standards. We are currently in ELA math review, ELA academic standards review cycle. Those are the words I was looking for. And then we'll be moving back into math during these next 3 years. And so it's perfect timing for us to have those directly incorporated into the master plan, as that is our first focus area. And then also next steps following our Algebra 2 report, we heard that report presented at our February board meeting. And so I think some logical next steps would make sense to incorporate into this master plan, as well as investigating opportunities for more advanced math course offerings at the middle school grade levels to ensure students are prepared for those advanced math courses that we are offering in high school. So these are the proposed revisions so far, and we'll get into some discussion points next, but any questions on these proposed revisions or comments?
I'm a little confused. Did you want to discuss whether these are the right ones at this point in time, or are you going to do that later?
Now would be a great time.
Okay, so my question, I'm glad to see the change to the addition of numeracy. My question is just by adding a single goal for math at 7th grade, going back to our concern that even 3rd grade literacy is too late to catch a lot of the, the issues on literacy. By waiting to 7th grade to evaluate how we're doing in math, that seems equally too late from that standpoint. So why would we not consider some intermediate earlier evaluation to be able to catch the students that aren't on grade level by then, instead of waiting to 7th grade? Just a question.
Sure. I think that with these goals that we're setting within the master plan, these are kind of the critical measuring points in which we're determining how successful we've been with all of those interventions and additional actions that have happened leading up to that grade level checkpoint. So it is not to suggest that we are not taking a look at all of the grade level outcomes or courses that students are taking. We do want to consider how our state assessments are reflecting how students are progressing every year. But this is, the way it is currently written, is designed to really pinpoint critical years, which give us a sense of how students are moving forward and what has worked or has not been as successful leading up to. So it doesn't have to stay that way, but just want to acknowledge that was the intent behind selecting those grade levels.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm not sure how to respond to that. I don't know what other people think, but it may be, again, it's our alignment with the Department of Education and all, and what they're doing and they're evaluating, and we're just getting a reading at 7th grade, but maybe they're going to do something in between that. Just waiting to 7th grade to say whether the student is on grade level or not in math just seems late to me. That's my thought.
This also aligns to some of the work that SCORE is doing. We had a presentation recently from SCORE in which they shared their Tennessee 2030 goals, and they also have a 7th grade math goal and checkpoint, as we've been talking about it. And so this idea also comes from aligning with that work, knowing that as a state, we're moving towards really focusing on some math initiatives to ensure that students are prepared by 7th grade for then those higher advanced math courses in high school.
I think it's really good to also look at middle school. Sometimes it gets forgotten a lot. We talk about post-secondary, and we're really focused on high school and ACT and Algebra 2, and we look at 3rd grade literacy and K2 and middle schools. It's a hard time, and we constantly see nationwide that scores begin to decline from 6th to 7th to 8th. So in that realm, I understand what you're saying, Bob, but it's really good to have a goal for middle school because it's sometimes kind of forgotten in the shuffle. So I kind of like having that 7th grade math goal.
I don't disagree with having it 7th grade. I think that's good. I'm just questioning, do we want something also like in literacy, we have 3rd grade and 8th grade. I think literacy, we have 2 grades in literacy. I'm just asking, does it make sense to have an earlier intention, math to see where they are as well as 7th grade? So that's just a thought.
Yeah.
Bob,
For us to keep considering, and also, does it make sense to have both of those still for literacy, or are we shifting to purely focus on 3rd grade in literacy, 7th grade for numeracy? Mr. Hall, I think I interrupted you. I apologize.
Hoping my audio was still working. I'm glad that it is. So going to Bob's point in this discussion, part of me wonders whether there is value in, instead of selecting individual years and giving them extra weight, looking at the average across all years. And I'm not sure if there's probably a reason that I'm missing for why it's so important to, and I understand with 3rd grade ELA, the reasons why we have focused on that in particular. But then once we get beyond the fact that that's the point at which I think, one, it's the earliest that we have the state tests on ELA, but there's also this important switch of learning to read and then reading to learn. But beyond that, it seems to me like we would want to focus on hitting a certain benchmark across the board in, proficiency and growth for numeracy and ELA, and maybe not focus just on what is the outcome for a specific year like 7th grade, but instead, are we seeing the numbers that we want to see in each grade? While we would focus on a specific grade as opposed to kind of an average of all the grades that are taking the test.
Let's talk about actually the goals themselves. I'm going to move us into the 2 discussion questions that we have proposed for conversation today, but feel free to add on. First being, should we change how we calculate our ELA and math goals? And then second, should we continue to set annual goals or set a 3-year goal tracking progress towards it annually? Very much along the lines of what we're discussing currently. So just wanted to put these questions forward as well. And you may remember how we set the ELA goals that are currently in the master plan. We were using the annual measurable objectives calculation, so AMO calculation, to help set that, which is how we landed at each incremental annual goal that we were tracking towards. But another possibility could be that we are taking a look at, let's say, over the last 3 years, as we've had these goals in place, we're looking at what was the average increase that we were making and develop a benchmark similar to that to use as our annual incremental goals. Or it could be in 3 years, we'll be at this point. So there's quite a few ways to consider how we draft these goals, and just wanted to get some input from you all of how you may be thinking about, one, calculating it, and secondly, how we are reflecting it. Is it annual increments? Is it in 3 years we'll be at this point, as well as the conversation we've been having now about grade levels.
This is Sarah. Ms. Reed, can I jump in? I think I finally got my audio working. I apologize. I have a new computer. Had not used WebEx yet. We had some discussions along the same line as a leadership team recently, because I think it's just hard. I mean, all of us care about looking at every grade every year and understanding progress, statewide, progress in subgroups of students. So I think just, again, for additional conversation, I think it's one thing to consider what we want to say we're measuring as part of the master plan, which is something that we'll track and look at and talk about sort of as a high level reflection of sort of overall progress for the state. I think it will be important, though, regardless, for us as a board to look at data every year in every grade and in every subgroup. So I just put that out there because I think whatever we decide, we still need to, as a board, be looking at the data every year in a more nuanced lens. And then thinking about sort of what do we pull up from the master plan, kind of dipstick pieces that we're looking at that we think are reflective of a bigger picture. But I think it's kind of balancing those two things. We want to look at the data every year. We need to have a couple dipstick sort of measurements that we're really tracking sort of at a high level publicly as part of our master plan. And I don't know what the answer is, but that's sort of how I've been thinking about it.
Thanks for that.
Ms. Reed, can I add a comment to what Sarah just said?
Please.
In my mind, from a logical standpoint, I think it's important to think about the interventions that we're expecting will happen within this period. So it's one thing to look at outcomes, but it's another to kind of have a strong understanding of what the department's doing, what districts and schools are focused on, and how well those initiatives align with the outcomes that we're looking at. So I would encourage us too, as we go through the rest of this, to think about that in the context of where we're measuring growth.
I think Sarah makes a good point there. You know, at some point in time, you have to have a dipstick to say whether you're there or not, but you look at it all the way through. I would just caution us. I think it's important that get well described, because otherwise somebody will only look at the dipstick instead of looking at how we're doing globally across the board. And so going back to Ryan's point, you know, we need people to understand what is this master plan versus what are we doing to prepare our students for post-secondary success throughout K through 12. I think that's an important distinction that we've got to be sure we make.
Any initial preferences or feelings related to how we are calculating these goals? We did receive lots of feedback related to whether or not they are attainable, and so wanted to just make sure we're giving some time to consider that.
I mean, we have had years in which we have hit the ELA progress goals that we have set for ourselves, right?
Yes.
At a minimum, want to set a bar that is ambitious enough that it, you know, if we have achieved it in the past, then it shows that we can achieve it. Obviously, hitting the highest goals in, you know, every single year is an ambitious thing to do, but I personally believe that's the sort of goals that we should be setting for ourselves. Discussion point of setting annual goals or setting a 3-year goal, tracking progress annually. Totally wondering what the distinction is between the two, because unless they're different, unless they are if you break down the 3-year goal, each annual step in it is different from the annual goal, they would seem to be sort of the same thing. We want to grow by 3 levels, whatever that is, in 3 years. And each year we would check off that we had gone up by 1 level. Or you could say, well, we want to go up by 1 level each year. And hopefully in 3 years, you've gone up 3 levels. So I'm not sure, unless the substance of the goal is different, what we go with.
Yeah, I think it's more of a preference. There has been, even from member survey feedback, discussion on whether or not we're setting something as annual or in 3 years we want to be at this point. I think that we saw some references again to the way that SCORE has recently released. They're referencing, bringing us back to the Tennessee 2030 goals. They have them set as by 2030 we'll be here. So we did see some interest in drafting our goals that way as well from the stakeholder feedback. but it really is a preference. You're right that we're not changing what we're measuring ultimately. I will mention this again at the end, but our next steps after this meeting is for staff to begin drafting some edits to the master plan and bringing this committee back together to react to that. So I think at least for the goal conversation, how we're writing it, we can draft them a few ways and then also take a look at it together of which one we prefer. Let's move into post-secondary and career, unless there's any other final comments. Okay. So under post-secondary and career, I will refresh us on what we heard high level from stakeholders and then talk about the proposed revisions. And we do have a few discussion questions for you again. So starting with some feedback that we received, we had lots of support related to the goals while also wanting clarity in the definitions to ensure a focus on multiple pathways and clear accountability metrics, whether we're using state versus federal accountability measures, which you see represented in that first bullet point on the slide. And then secondly, a push for better alignment between the two goals under this focus area, cautioning over an over-reliance on narrow enrollment measures that may not reflect long-term student outcomes. So if you recall, under the post-secondary and career focus area, we have two goals currently. The first one is related to readiness, and then the second one is related to post-secondary enrollment. So that second goal related to enrollment is where we did see a lot of feedback from stakeholders and members as well, making sure we're considering everything that students have in terms of their next step, not only post-secondary, but students considering or enrolling in enlisting into the military, as well as moving directly into career pathways. And while we certainly do agree that those are important things to measure, there are some data limitations here. And so I think that is a consideration if we are setting a specific goal to it. The real data that we have is related to post-secondary, which is inclusive, if you refer to that third bullet point, of in-state and out-of-state, public and private, 2- and 4-year institutions, as well as our TCATs. I know that there is a real interest and push among stakeholder groups in Tennessee to really expand the data that we have available to us. The department is actively working on this as well, but it is not something that we currently have a complete picture of. So we are a little bit limited in terms of what measurable goal we are setting related to students' pathways following graduation. Any questions on what is proposed so far or comments that you're seeing here on the slide? The second bullet point references Future Ready, which is a new initiative from the Department of Education, and they will be sharing an update on that initiative at our November workshop, which we're looking forward to hearing and learning more about. But this is also where I was going to highlight, Michael, what you had mentioned related to the technology and agriculture course. I think there's also a real interest from the department that we want to reflect in the master plan or consider reflecting here in working together to develop coursework that combines pathways for students to have more of a holistic educational experience, such as what we saw in that proposal that the board approved in August. So continuing in that direction. So here are our discussion questions, and again, feel free to add on. But the first one is, should we add an action step to study innovative learning models and highlight partnerships between districts? I have this here under post-secondary and career, but it is not limited to. I think that if we're seeing or want to highlight examples of real strong pockets of results in literacy and numeracy, that makes sense to include as an action step under that focus area as well. So don't feel like it's limited here. But I think there was some suggestions from stakeholders of the board really playing a role in elevating those existing partnerships or just positive bright spots that we're seeing around the state. And then secondly, should we consider an action step that requests information on the connection between a student's college and career readiness indicator and next steps after graduation. So getting at the fact that, as I was just sharing, we do have some limitations in the data, but there may be some connections or data that we can review, information we can consider to see if there are direct connections related to what students are accomplishing in high school and where they are going next after graduation. So I have an example here. Let's say a student earns over a 21 on the ACT, or they complete a tier 3 industry credential. What is the likelihood that that student is enrolling in a post-secondary institution? Do we have any evidence or data that connects those things that we may want to look at or consider here? So open it up to you all to talk through these discussion points or anything else related to the post-secondary and career focus area.
Got a question or comment. I think in some ways we may be missing a key thing here. We hear a lot recently about P20 and about longitudinal data. And again, if our mission is to prepare students for post-secondary success, how are we doing that? How are we meeting this workforce needs that Larry brings up in West Tennessee, or that we're bringing up in East Tennessee? And East Tennessee includes a big new plant, Chrissy, up in your area with BWXT, we're just announcing there. So how can we, and I know there's a lot of conversation right now about getting that P20 longitudinal data, which I think we ought to somehow try to strive to get. And then again, working with higher ed, working with TDOE, working with workforce, measure how we're preparing our students for those post-secondary career opportunities. So I don't see P20 in here. I don't see, is that something that we ought to add, I guess, is a question I'm asking.
I think that the second bullet point gets at that idea, but there's certainly no harm in specifically naming that. 100% agree. Other thoughts here?
I've said similar comment. The 21 is a great standard. And I think most of you know the University of Memphis changed their entrance to 21. And what they've done as an alternative or addition to that is they've created a pathway to go through Southwest Tennessee Community College, do the remedial work, and they are automatically admitted to the University of Memphis, which includes an ID. They can use facilities, they go to games, and when they finish that remedial work, they are automatically enrolled. So that's a little much for this, but I just want us to make sure that we don't discourage people that have an 18 or 17 or whatever from seeing a pathway that might lead to post-secondary. I don't know if we need to do anything with that, but I just raised that as an issue that, and when we look at UT or Vanderbilt, it doesn't even apply there. I mean, there are a lot of schools like probably Austin Peay, probably Middle Tennessee State, Memphis, that this is a challenge that's there.
The auto enrollments one is a great example to highlight. So thank you for mentioning that. Another thing that I heard from the Department of Education was a reminder about the new program in which students are automatically enrolled into the University of Tennessee system. And so I think continuing to highlight that or learn more about how that program is going can certainly be another piece of this section within the master plan.
This discussion point expands both our goals 3 and 4. Is that right?
Yes.
And goal 4 was one of the goals that I think half of the stakeholders who responded to the survey suggested that we remove or replace.
Yes.
Have you all given thought to whether, with specifically, which was percentage of students enrolling post-secondary will increase by 3 points annually, removed or replaced entirely, and we should replace it with?
I think that when you look at the responses for those who were identifying to remove or replace, you actually dig into their rationale, their why for selecting that. A lot of the feedback, again, really focused on fully defining what post-secondary meant. I think that we have in our supplemental document a definition of post-secondary, but that's not clearly obvious to someone who's just reading the goal. And so ensuring that we are very clearly naming that we're not only talking about students enrolling in a four-year university, as well as I mentioned earlier, this desire for tracking or having data on what students are doing beyond post-secondary enrollment. So military enlistment, going directly into career paths. And so that we're not setting a goal that is so narrow, but here is back to the point of our data limitation, and Chairman Eby mentioned the P20 pipeline data that we're really wanting to see come to fruition. I think certainly could be something that not only we're acknowledging in the master plan that we're advocates for that, but potentially even having in the engagement and accountability something related to ensuring that the different partners are moving us closer towards actually having access to that data.
Envisioning adding like data requests, sort of the types of data that we are hoping to gather into the master plan itself. So it would be like a goal, a measurable goal is, that we're going to increase enrollment by 3 points each year, but then also we want for data to be gathered so that we can ensure that we have an understanding of where the increase in enrollment is going to and what has resulted in our students being able to have that increased enrollment.
Yep, I think of the latter as more of an action step rather than setting a goal, because it's not perhaps as measurable as the way I'm thinking about it. But yes, absolutely. I think directly addressing that in the master plan makes sense.
Will we replace any or change the language of the goal at all then under what we're discussing, or it's just that we would clarify that when we say post-secondary institution, we mean broader than four-year college? Explain what that is, and then have some language in the master plan about the sort of data that we think must be gathered so we can ensure that we understand what's happening here.
I mean, I think that's also up to the committee to decide, do we want to replace that goal, or is that adjustment sufficient? Mr. Holt, the audio was going in and out a little bit. I'm not sure if you heard that last part.
Or I was just looking at the comments again and reflecting on what you said. Although half of them.
Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry. Do we have a definition for readiness for post-secondary and careers that is generally agreed upon? How do we define readiness for post-secondary and careers? And I'm thinking careers. I mean, post-secondary, I think is easy to measure. Okay. But are we meeting the needs of business and industry with qualified students, those who are going directly into career situations or whatever. I mean, and again, this gets to us with higher ed and the other organizations, but
yeah, this first bullet point on the previous slide speaks to the need to shift our readiness goal from the federal accountability indicator, which is what it currently is, using Ready Graduate to determine whether students are ready. So that readiness goal is using the Ready Graduate indicator, which the state of Tennessee has used as the one of the federal accountability metrics. What has been since created since we developed this master plan 3 years ago is a state accountability indicator that's a little bit different. And it's the college and career readiness indicator. And so first and foremost, we want to really focus entirely on state accountability. And so changing that definition or what data point we're looking at to determine readiness from the Ready Graduate federal indicator to the college and career readiness state indicator. What's different about those is Ready Graduate really focuses on what are you enrolled in or engaged in high school versus what are you actually completing. So for example, in the college and career readiness, one of the measures underneath that to determine if a student is ready for college and career is the completion of Tier 2 and Tier 3 credentials. And so it's not only enrolling in that course, but actually completing it and getting credit. Same thing for related to post-secondary enrollment. If you're not only enrolling in an advanced placement course, but receiving the college credit. And so that's really kind of the biggest shift between the two. And so certainly that is where we want to be moving towards as well. For the next 3 years is that focus on state accountability indicator, and the college and career readiness would be the way that at least currently we're thinking about as the measuring point.
So I don't disagree with that, but if that's what it's going to be, we ought to state that in our goal. So there's no confusion. Other people may think, we're thinking one thing.
Yes.
But
how we're measuring it. Absolutely. Other thoughts on post-secondary and career? Okay, I will move us into, did I hear someone? Okay, I'll move us into teachers and leaders. So for teachers and leaders, this focus area, again, reminder of some of the feedback that we heard was strong support for the spirit of the goal here related to moving educators from who are on a temporary permit to a permanent license. So strong support for that, but while also stressing that licensure conversion must be accompanied by financial and professional supports and broadened to consider educator effectiveness and retention. So Brianna did a nice job of highlighting this earlier. We really want to shift the focus for the next 3 years, or what we hear from stakeholders is to shift the focus to being about educator effectiveness and retention. So we have made a lot of adjustments to build in flexibility for licensure. And so I think that this is an important point, that the next steps likely should include financial and professional supports to continue that conversation, while also shifting, again, our focus to effectiveness and retention of our educators. The other key piece of feedback that we heard from stakeholders is that many see the goals as useful pieces of the teacher workforce puzzle, but it is not a standalone solution. And certainly this is, as Brianna was mentioning earlier, related to, or some of the thoughts we have related to adding in the leader piece. And so here is an opportunity to start to consider that, discuss it for what we want to incorporate into the master plan for the next 3 years. But again, we're also recognizing that we do have some limitations in data here as well. So as we're thinking about what we're adding in, I think that what you see on the slide here is action steps related to further research on effective leader qualities, Brianna also mentioned the suggestion of connecting with Tara, the Tennessee Educator Research Alliance, who does have some data points on this. So I think really starting to dig in a bit more on that with them can certainly be one of our actions that exists here, knowing that we don't have really clear data on this currently. So it would be really difficult to set an actual goal. So focusing more on our actions that can then turn into, actions related to research, further studying something, publicly highlighting, which can then turn into a goal later on. Any questions, comments on the proposed revisions that you see here? Okay, some considerations, and taking that a little bit of a step further, is considering to add an action step calling for further study on the relationship between effectiveness and retention. And that can be for both teachers and leaders, as well as an action step centered around the impact of AI on the educator job market and profession. These are two pieces of feedback we also heard in the stakeholder survey and from members and staff for us to consider adding in here. So reactions to these?
Are you asking for an answer?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Simple enough.
Yes, on both of those, I think.
Yes. I agree.
Turn to a vote. So we like the direction here. Great. What's missing? What other things, anything else that's popping into your mind that we want to discuss together?
Go ahead, Larry.
To Bob's point, I mean, the governor has set forth a energy, focus, nuclear. I don't know where that is exactly in this. It's beyond the impact of AI, but it is certainly an important thing. And we're hearing rumblings over here. I mean, so I think the state's going to become feels like a real center for nuclear energy. These, what do they call, Bob? The small nuclear reactors that are probably going to be with us within 10 years for sure, which is a reactor the size of your garage that can run a plant, et cetera, et cetera. So
well, you're going to have them to power the AI. I mean, AI requires, these data centers require a tremendous amount of power. And that's the intent, is to, like have small modular reactors to be able to power that. And that gets to my question here is, should we add an action step centered around the impact of AI on the educator job market and profession? Are we missing the entire AI point here with regard to education? I mean, it's not just educator job market and profession. AI is here to stay. Should our master plan include something with regard to AI, since it is a whole new novel process that's going to be impacting career and post readiness and teacher educator and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I did speak with the new director, Oak Ridge National Laboratories, in charge of AI. And for example, what she told me was that in the future, software engineering was going to be a thing of the past. It's going to be prompting engineering. That's going to be the new study field, is how do you ask the right questions to AI, et cetera. So is there something that we ought to be including in our master plan here to address AI?
Michael,
It's a great quote.
the second part of that question I would ask is, who is looking at what we ought to be thinking about? I mean, same thing with coding. That is probably going to be a thing of the past. And you look at that from a career technical education, and we probably got a bunch of coding stuff going on around the state, and eventually it goes away. I don't know. I don't know who has the ball to go and look at the curriculum that we've got and try to think about it beyond, the next 12 months or 15 or 2 years or whatever.
Yeah, I told her that I wanted to come and sit down with her to talk to her because I think we need to be talking to industry, what their needs are going to be in an AI world. Whether it's an AI data center or whether it's using AI to more effectively do the job that you're doing. So I think that's something that we need to think about.
This is Sarah jumping in if this is a good time, but just a couple quick notes because I think I'm sure we have seen times like this in the past. It's you can start to see kind of where the puck is headed, but you can't totally predict. I mean, I think we're going to have to, as a board, set ourselves up to be in the right conversations continually so we can continue to think about the impact on the things that are under our authority, like standards and teacher prep. And just a couple of things. We'll talk about this more at the retreat on Friday, but I've got a call later today with SCORES AI network that I've been a part of that has been really helpful in, kind of trying to track national trends and looking at what's happening locally more across the state in terms of early adopters and sort of where AI is providing some benefit in education. And then there's another group that I'm just going to start some of our team members will be on there with me as well, but state leaders across the US coming together semi-regularly to talk about things that they're seeing and doing in education around AI. Now, there's much more that we probably can and should be doing as a board, but I just mentioned those two things so that we can tee ourselves up for additional conversations about how we want to make sure we're in regular conversation about what are the impacts that AI is having, will have, what are the responses and the things that we need to be thinking about as a board, as a society. But and Orion, you've had thoughts about this too that we've been in conversation about, but I think it's something that we're not going to be able to solve, but I do wonder how we show it in the master plan that this is a priority and something that we're taking seriously and trying to address in the different ways that it affects the things that the board has control over. Thank you for letting me ramble. Turn it back to you, Allie.
You're good. Thank you. I think, sorry, go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
I could just make a remark or two on that as well. One of the things we may want to consider is how do we structure a function of the board that maybe is tasked with looking at the latest innovations, not only in education generally, but in the workforce that would deal with all of this sort of change that's coming. In other words, to set up some apparatus of the board, whether it be a committee or even something that we do on a semi-annual basis or at least once a year that takes a look at all of the changes in these areas. Because one thing's for certain, there's no one set of magic moves that we could make. We'll have to have some apparatus in place to be ready for the continuing evolution, the continuing set of innovations that's coming our way and towards everything, both educationally and in industry.
I think to the point of asking the right questions, not only for AI, but when you think about the board's role in academic standards, the department is really responsible for so many of the academic standards. We, of course, have the core 4, and certainly we want to be thinking about what role does AI play in those courses. But specifically in incorporating AI into workforce and into the learning, the department really is leading on this. And as we referenced earlier, those courses that you just approved related to technology and agriculture came about from exactly conversations like this and the evolving need in that industry. And so I think that the idea of asking the right questions is so important for this board. Is when we're approving those standards the department is bringing forward, we're asking those questions of how are we thinking about AI here, and pushing the department to explain that and point to those clearly the work that they've been doing to make those connections. And so that is kind of the touch point, the checkpoint for our board here to ask all these same questions that you're bringing up right now related to AI in the coursework for our students.
I think Ryan is trying to get in. He's sent a couple of chats to see if we've heard him. Josh, I think he's asking you to, I don't know if you've seen the note, to give him a call. His cell phone isn't working anymore or something. So, but again, to your comment, Allie, again, it shows the importance that we align closely with TDOE and in higher ed and what we're doing and who has responsibilities for it. But you know, we need to be in good alignment across the board there. I like Nathan's comment of having some kind of a committee or something, because education is always evolving. And certainly in the last couple of years, because of AI, it has evolved probably faster than in any, you know, in decades. And so I think having some kind of focus area to look at that is something that we ought to think about.
Allie, just a quick thought. It feels like some of these things that are being discussed probably fit nicely in the engagement and accountability space. Chairman Eby, one thing when you brought up the P20 system, I think because there are so many players that are involved in management of that system and governance of that system, that could be a space where board members kind of hold other agencies and individuals accountable for ensuring that access to that system and our ability to do research on outcomes post high school can actually be conducted. And then with AI, I think some of what we're discussing here really falls under the engagement piece, so that the board is knowledgeable about nationally and locally what advancements are being made in AI, so that you can be able to ask those questions when standards come up for review and when you all are approving textbooks for those courses as well. Because you don't have a ton of oversight into the nuts and bolts of those processes, but the buck really does stop with you.
Good point. Good point.
You all hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful. So I agree that it's really important for us to include AI in the strategic plan in some ways, just given how there's unlikely there's anything that's going to change education in the world as much over the next 3 years as AI. Looking through the goals, it seems like all of the goals themselves are things that, at least as I think about them, we would want to keep and that are important as stated, regardless of what the impacts are of AI on what jobs are available and how teachers teach and students learn due to developments with AI. But having some action items or some sort of statement regarding AI, a committee. And I know we talked about maybe having an AI committee before, and there was some discussion about whether, I guess there's a governor's task force on AI. You know, we wouldn't want to be working at cross purposes, but it does seem like the work of the state board likely interacts with changes that are happening to society because of AI at a level where it would be great for us to kind of house that with, you know, one or more folks with the state board. So I don't know the answer to it, but I'd like, Michael, your thought on with the accountability goal 6, you know, are having some action items on studying AI and sort of objectives on areas that we want to focus on in particular.
Great points. Well, on that note, let's move us into engagement and accountability. This is our 4th and final focus area in the master plan. And some of the overarching feedback that we received here is for it to remain the goal to remain, but just generally that it feels, I think some people put it as less ambitious or less measurable, more of a baseline responsibility than the other goals. But I think that's also by design. This is the foundational work and purpose of the state board. And we did have one executive comment, probably one of my favorite pieces of feedback. They said goal number 6, frankly, is their job. And so I appreciate that realization that this is really where the work is for the state board, with the engagement piece, as we've been discussing more broadly today, and accountability. I also want to highlight that in conversations with the Department of Education, they're really focused on continuing to clear the way for districts to do the work by minimizing burdens and streamlining efforts whenever possible. And this comment just reminds me of the presentation we heard back in May from TNTP, in which we discussed the importance of ensuring rules and policies are not unintentionally creating organizational incoherence, either at the state or local levels. And that really speaks to the purpose of why we are updating our rules and policies. Of course, we have legislative changes that we need to incorporate, but beyond that, how are we making those decisions? And that should be at the forefront of our mind when we're making those decisions and revisions to our rules and policies. Is it creating, unintentionally creating organizational incoherence? So keeping that in mind as well. A few considerations here I have on the slide related to adding action steps that specifically address member engagement and ensuring items before the board have clear connection to positively impacting student outcomes. And then adding an action step related to accountability hearings. We will be stepping into that in March of 2026, and those will continue through all 3 years of the master plan and beyond. And so is there space for us to add in an action step related to accountability hearings and the board's role in just encouraging collaboration or seeing a decrease in the number of F schools? There's some considerations here as well. Any questions, comments on these 2 bullet points or any other related topics? We have one discussion slide left for this focus area. Okay. For discussion, we have 2 questions to pose. And then, of course, as we've been doing, feel free to add on. First one being, should we add a goal for member engagement, such as every board member attends at least 2 external activities annually within their district? So specifically naming that, calling that out as a goal itself, something that our board has been really excellent and focused on doing the last 3 years, but actually making a goal around it. And then secondly, should we add an action step to study chronic absenteeism and highlight best practices for effectively reducing rates? That is a piece of feedback that we heard a few times in stakeholder survey, was just elevating the chronic absenteeism concerns that we have, not only in our state, but nationally, and could be a place where we're considering that related to engagement and accountability. I don't know that there's necessarily a perfect spot for chronic absenteeism to fit under our focus areas, but it seems that the accountability piece can be where we're tying in this interest in potentially studying chronic absenteeism and best practices for highlighting effective rates, reducing rates, and of course ties into our accountability hearings. We'll be having similar conversations with districts and charter schools who may be seeing high rates as well. So I'll open it up to the committee for further discussion.
Well, I was going to give the other board members a chance to speak first, but I'll go ahead. The first goal, adding member engagement as for every board member, I think that's important. I think our board is more engaged than any time that I've been, my 6.5, 7 years on the board. And I think that engagement is critical for us to be able to do the job that we can do. I think each one of our board members meet this requirement, but if we're setting this down the road for the next boards, et cetera, I think setting a expectation like that is probably a positive thing to do. It's my feeling. So.
Question, is that enough? Is two seems kind of light for annually.
It does say at least, but yes, what do y'all think?
I agree with you, Larry, but a lot of board members have full-time jobs and, you know, I don't want that to keep a top-notch person from becoming a board member or something. But I think it sets the expectation. Maybe we can change the wording a little bit. It does say at least. You know, maybe in our write-up, we talk about the importance of member engagement and then set a goal like that or something. Because I don't think that a board member can effectively do their job if they're not actively
Right.
engaged.
I mean, could you say attends a minimum of 2 external, like, I mean, in other words, leave it somewhat open, but hopefully encouraging to become more engaged.
What else here?
I think this just serves as a good place, you know, to be reminded of the important work of the board in terms of its core functions. And you're right. I mean, some of the feedback indicated that folks consider that to be the job of the board. And as such, it's got to be, you know, at the forefront. If we have rules and policies that have unintended consequences or are being forgotten about, then there's no point in having them there. Or maybe the conversation needs to be redirected to why they were put there in the first place. It's just it's general reminder that in terms of K-12 policy in the state of Tennessee, it's the State Board of Education that provides the continuity through administrations, through time periods, and frankly, through the various fads of education policy, where some things become the newest and shiniest thing, and all of the attention is paid to those things. So it's very important work.
Thanks for that addition. Okay. Any final thoughts on our discussion today? It doesn't have to be related to engagement and accountability, but our 4 focus areas. Final thoughts here.
I want to thank each one of the committee members and the staff. This is such a critical part of our work, and thank you for your time and what you've done so far and will continue to do that you'll bring to the board in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Ms. Reed, what are our action items from here?
So we can move into our next steps and adjournment. We want to share those out.
Sure, happy to. So, and I may have questions on these. I can read it from the screen, but I also want to make sure that I'm accurately representing what's happening next. So in November, so in a couple of months, we'll be releasing our 2025 master plan report and have a strategic planning committee update at the board meeting. I do have a question about the report. So is that something that we're going to have further discussions about internally before we release it? And what do we expect to see in that report?
The master plan report is similar to the ones that we've had the last 2 years. So this is the 3rd and final, if you will, report for the current master plan as we're running on 3-year cycles. in which we will report out on how we've done in terms of progress towards our goals that are established in the current master plan and discuss the work ahead. That is a document that mostly is driven by our staff in updating that report document that we have from last year with the 2025 results. And we can certainly share it a draft if you would like to provide some input on it. That's typically how we've done it the last few years, is to share a draft with members for final input, and then you are formally approving it at the board meeting and discussing at the board meeting in November.
Great, thank you. I wasn't sure whether that was the same annual report that we've been doing in the past, or if that was
It is, yes.
result of what the committee has been doing the past few months. So that's helpful. And then in December, we will have another work session for this committee. And do we have any sort of anticipated agenda items or focus for that committee work session?
Yep, so we'll need to schedule that, of course. So I'll send out a scheduling poll for that. But the goal on this work session in December will be to actually react to a draft based on this conversation, based on stakeholder feedback for the next iteration of the master plan. And then, of course, previewing for 2026, February is when we would have that final master plan before the full board for approval, and would do a more formal communications release related to our revised master plan for the next 3 years.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see, so do we have any other agenda items for today?
That is all I have. If anyone has anything else they want to add in.
Nothing else for me. So unless anyone else has any items, that concludes the work of this committee. And with no further business of the committee, this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your engagement today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.